The road ended in dust and silence. No sign, no mercy. It's just a woman tied to a post, 2 newborns at her feet, and a man who hadn't spoken in 3 days. What happened next would change all of them forever. The wind had been blowing since. Morning, a dry, relentless thing that scoured the land raw. By afternoon, the sun hung pale behind a scrim of yellow grit, and the road James rode along dissolved into nothing, just 2 leaning fence posts without a gate, a track so thin it vanished between the dying mesquite. This wasn't the kind of place a man stumbled on. You had to already be lost to find it. James wasn't lost, though. He knew exactly where he was. Nowhere. That suited him fine. 3 days without speaking, not even to the horse, and he preferred it that way. Words had a way of complicating things. The mare's ribs heaved under him, lathered from the long trail south, but he let her pick the pace. No need to rush. Never was. Then he heard it. A sound so soft it could have been the wind caught in something hollow. But James, stilled in the saddle, turned his head and listened. Another cry, then silence. Then 2 whimpers, thin and new, wrapped. Inside Winter's Edge, he dismounted. The air smelled like rust and pine tar, like old neglect. Sagebrush clawed at his legs as he pushed through, boots crunching on deadfall. And then he saw her. A woman. Tied upright to a splintered post, arms wrenched behind her, dress ripped down the sleeve. Dried blood streaked her temple. Her face was half-shadowed beneath tangled dark hair, her eyes open but vacant as dusk. She didn't look at him, didn't move. At her feet, wrapped tight in a horse blanket, like 2 infants, squirmed, tiny pink-cheeked, no older than a day. One sucked weakly at the cloth. The other blinked as if the world had already tired her. James didn't speak. Crouched. The woman's lips parted. A sound crawled out, dry as gravel. Don't take them. He unhooked his knife. Moved slow. The ropes fell away, and her hands dropped like stones. Swayed once, then collapsed. He caught her. She was featherlight, nothing but bones and silence. Down the hill, an old homestead sagged, half collapsed, smoke still ghosting from the chimney. No one there now. But they'd been. The ropes were too fresh. James gathered the twins first, tucking them into his saddle blanket, slung careful around his chest. Then he lifted the woman, one arm beneath her knees, the other cradling her back, and carried her like something breakable to the mare. "You're coming with me," he said. Not loud, just steady. A promise. She didn't answer. The ride back was slow. He walked the horse to keep the babies from jostling. The woman's head lolled against his chest once, and he adjusted the blanket tighter. Snowflakes drifted down, lazy and wide, sticking to lashes, melting into collars. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had folded in on itself. It wasn't much one room, a stove in the corner, a cot by the window. He kicked the door open, carried her inside. Warmth hit like a whisper. The babies whimpered louder now, one flailing tiny fists. Hungry James worked quiet, efficient. Laid the woman down, checked her for bleeding, more bruises than cuts, ankles raw from rope, one eye swelling shut. He covered her with a quilt, stoked the fire, warmed the last of the goat's milk in jars. The twins drank greedily, mouths working fast, eyes fluttering shut. Only then did he sit back. He didn't sleep that night, just watched her chest rise and fall, the twins curled in his old shirt. Her name was unknown. It's her story too, but it didn't matter. Not yet. What mattered was the look on her face when he'd found her. Not fear, not even shame, just surrender. Like she'd stopped expecting to be rescued, and that was a thing James understood. Morning came gray and slow. She stirred, groaned, turned her head toward the cradle. Her eyes opened. "Found him? You didn't leave us?" she whispered. He shook his head. She tried to sit, winced. Voice cracked. "They said I wasn't worth feeding. Said girls bring no dowry, that I should have died giving birth." James dipped a cloth in warm water, handed it to her. She pressed it to her cheek, fingers trembling. Then she looked at him fully, You're not afraid of what people say. It's taking in a woman like me, 2 daughters and no husband. He tilted his head. You're safe. That's all that matters. Something in her eyes softened, then not tears, but disbelief. A shimmer of something long buried. Outside, a crow called. The wind shifted, snow hissing against the windows like whispers trying to get in. Safety, yes. Safety was just the beginning. Because Nora's past wasn't done with her. The fire never went out. Not once in the 6 days since James carried Nora and the twins across his threshold. He fed it before dawn when the world was still blue and hushed, stirred the coals at dusk, tucked fresh logs between chores without being asked. Nora noticed just as she noticed how he stepped outside when she tended the babies, giving her space like it was sacred. Silence lived between them, but not the stiff kind. This was deliberate, comfortable, the kind that said words might scare the fragile peace they'd built. By week's end, Nora could walk without swaying. The bruises on her neck faded from purple to sickly yellow, her rope-burned wrists bending without pain. She wore James' spare flannel, the sleeves rolled to her forearms, and a skirt she'd stitched from 2 patched pillowcases. It hung crooked, but she didn't complain. When she spoke, her voice was always careful, like someone rationing breath. The twins, her little snowbirds, slept longer now, their cheeks pinkening. One morning, Nora found 2 wooden rattles on the windowsill. Pine, carved with clumsy flowers on the handles. James hadn't mentioned them. She hovered a hand over the tiny grooves, lips parting like she might cry. Instead, she tucked them into the cradle and went back to folding cloth. That was their language. Not words, but things made and left in silence. James rode out before noon each day, always back by dark. Sometimes with feed sacks, sometimes with bolts of cloth from town. Nora never asked where he went. Ranch work, maybe trading, but sometimes, watching him clean his rifle with extra care, she wondered if he was keeping their presence quiet. The town hadn't come calling yet. Then Mrs. Evelyn Parrish arrived. Nora was at the well, hauling water when she turned and saw the widow standing by the road. The woman's mule wore a red blanket stitched with her initials. Her bonnet sat crooked, sharp eyes scanning the cabin like she was tallying scenes. Well, Evelyn said, eyeing the twins' laundry, drying on the porch line. You look far too alive for someone buried by her husband's kin. Nora tightened her grip on the bucket. Evelyn stepped closer, voice dropping. People are talking, Missy. About him keeping you here with 2 babes and no name? My name is Nora. A name don't carry much without a ring. Evelyn smirked, turning toward the house. Tell James the first brought flour. He'll need it. Feeding 3 mouths now. She left slowly, letting the shame sink in like poison. James emerged moments later, took the bucket wordlessly. That night, Nora sat stiff by the fire while he fixed the door hinge. They'll never stop, she said finally, reminding me I don't belong. James kept working. You belong here, not in any town. The hinge creaked as he tested it. I don't answer to. Town's Nora's hands fisted in her lap. You don't know what it's like to be treated like filth for birthing girls. Like you're just another mouth no one wants to feed. James stilled. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I know what it's like to be alone, so long you forget your own name. The fire popped between them. Those babies ain't curses, and neither are you. He reached into his coat, slid a jar across the table. Sweet cream, the kind she'd mentioned missing once. Heard you like this, he murmured. Nora pressed her lips together, took the jar in both hands like it was something holy. No thanks, none. Needed morning found them side by side at the fence line, him hammering posts, her passing nails. The wind bit cold, but something between them had shifted, like a rope that had been fraying, now doubled in strength. Later, she found a book on the mantle. A worn Psalms, its spine cracked. Inside the cover, faded ink read, To James, from your mother for when silence gets heavy. Nora traced the underlined verses, the margin notes in a shaky hand. You read scripture? She asked when he entered. The parts that sound like songs, he said, that night. When the wind howled and a twin wailed, James lifted her without being asked. He paced the cabin, whispering something Nora couldn't hear until the babe quieted. When he turned, his gaze held hers, really held it like he was seeing past the bruises for the first time. Neither spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, snow tapped. The window like a stranger begging entry. But inside, the silence was warm. And it was enough for now, because whispers turned to threats. And soon, the shadows would come knocking. The morning they came, Nora was at the window with a dishcloth in her hands. The cloth fell forgotten as she saw them emerge from the mist. 3 riders moving slow and purposeful up the trail. The lead man wore a brown coat she knew too well. Matthew, her husband's brother. The other 2 were cousins, their faces hard as the rifle stocks resting across their saddles. Her breath fogged the glass. The twins stirred in their cradle behind her, sensing the sudden tension in the air. James was outside before the riders reached the gate. He didn't take his rifle. He leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, watching them come. The picture of calm, but Nora saw the way his fingers flexed once against his biceps. The horses stopped 10 paces out. Matthew spat into the dirt. "That woman inside belongs to our family. Them girls carry our blood." James didn't move. "That's so." Matthew's jaw worked. "We ain't looking for trouble. Just come to take back what's ours. She's not yours to take." James's voice was quiet, final, not a thing to be claimed. "She was my brother's wife." Matthew's shout sent a raven bursting from a nearby pine. "Them brats got his name. Then your brother should have stayed alive." A beat of silence. One cousin shifted in his saddle. The other thumbed back his rifle's hammer with a click that carried in the cold air. Matthew leaned forward. "Don't make this ugly, rancher." James straightened from the post. "Neither do I." He stepped forward then, empty-handed, boots crunching, in the frost. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as he walked toward them without hesitation. The wind caught his shirt, pressed it against the hard lines of his body. "You ride down this hill now," he said, so soft she barely heard through the glass. "Or I bury 3 more men before supper?" Matthew's eyes flicked to the cabin window, found Nora watching. His lip curled. "She ain't worth it. Women, like herd, ruin good men." James didn't blink. "She's more woman than you'll ever be, man." The words hung between them like drawn steel. For a terrible moment, Nora thought she'd hear gunfire. Then Matthew yanked his rein so hard his horse reared. He wheeled away without another word, the cousins following. Their shapes dissolved into the mist as quietly as they'd come. James watched until they were gone from sight. Only then did he turn back to the cabin. Nora hadn't moved from the window. Her arms were wrapped tight around herself, nails digging into her sleeves through the fabric. When James stepped inside, she spoke without turning. "I didn't ask you to fight for me. I didn't do it for you." She turned then, startled. He met her gaze, steady as always. "Did it cause no one should have to beg to be left alone?" "Worked. They'll come back. I know. With more men next time." James nodded once. The truth settled between them like snow soft, inevitable. Nora looked down at the twins, their perfect faces untroubled by the ugliness outside. Her hands trembled until she clenched them into fists. That night, she sat long after the baby slept, staring into the fire while James sharpened his knife. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone filled the quiet. "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered finally. James stilled. "You belong here." She shook her head, eyes on the flames. "Never have. Not with my husband. Not in his family's house." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was something to marry. Something to bear children. That's all." The knife went still. James stood, poured warm water from the stove into her cup. "You're not something," he said, pressing it into her hands. "You're someone." Her fingers shook around the cup. "I'm so tired of running." Then stop. Simple, certain, like it was the easiest thing in the world. "I don't know how," she admitted. James crouched beside her, one knee on the floor, his hand resting on the edge of the cradle. "You stay." That's how her breath caught. And when she turned. To him, his face was closer than she'd ever seen it, the scar above his brow. The flecks of green in his hazel eyes, the way his beard caught the firelight. Something shimmered in her chest, old and nameless. She reached out, barely brushing, his calloused hand with her fingertips. The contact sent a current through her, shocking in its simplicity. For the first time since her husband's death, since the ropes had cut into her wrists, she felt seen, not as a burden.
That is property.
But as herself. "I'm not ready," she whispered. No, his voice was rough. "Might never be. I'll still be here." "Why?" James stood, walked to the fire. The flames painted his profile in gold and shadow. "Because you stayed when you could have gone." Outside, the wind moaned through the pines. Inside, the fire burned steady. The twins sighed in their sleep. And Nora, for the first time in longer than she could remember, felt something like hope take root in the broken places of her heart. The fight was over, but the real battle was just beginning inside Nora's heart. The morning the letter came, the world smelled like thawing earth and pine sap. Nora stood barefoot on the porch, a twin, balanced on each hip, watching sunlight spill over the ridge. She didn't hear the clerk approach until his mule snorted at the gate. The man's face was red from the climb, his fingers ink-stained as he held out the envelope. "From your mother's people," he said, avoiding her eyes. "They said it's urgent." Paper crackled as she opened it with one hand. The words blurred at first talk of inheritance. A house waiting in some far-off town, a nursemaid's wages, a new start, a way to give the girls a proper name. Her breath came shallow as she reached the signature, a cousin she hadn't seen since childhood. Back when the world still held kindness, James came around the barn, his shirt damp with sweat from chopping wood. He took one look at her face, and, stilled, Nora didn't speak, just handed him the letter. His calloused fingers left smudges on the fine paper as he read. When he finished, he simply folded it and gave it back. No protest, no pleading, just that endless quiet. Without a word, he turned and walked to the barn. By noon, her bag was packed. Not much to show for 6 weeks of life as spare dress. Twins' swaddling clothes, the wooden rattles James had carved. She sat on the porch steps with the bag at her feet, watching sunlight dapple through the pines. The girls played in the dirt nearby, one chewing on her fist, the other batting at a beetle with startling focus. James emerged from the barn leading her mare, brushed and saddled. He carried a parcel wrapped in oilcloth cheese, bread, a water, skin, the good wool blanket she'd patched last week. These he placed beside her without ceremony. "You'll be all right," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Nora looked up at him. "And you?" His eyes stayed on the distant mountains. "I was all right before." The words shouldn't have stung, but they did not because they were cruel, but because they were true. This man who needed nothing had given everything without being asked, and now he'd let her go just as easily. "You're not going to stop me," she said, testing. James shook his head once. "Was never my place." The twins babbled, oblivious. Nora swallowed hard. "They like it here. They'll like wherever you are." She stood then, legs unsteady. Each step toward the waiting horse felt like wading through deep water. At the edge of the porch, she turned back. "Do you want me to go?" Something cracked, then not in his face, but behind his eyes, like a dam giving way under silent pressure. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible over the wind in the pines. "I want you to stay." A pause, but only if it's what you want. Nora's throat tightened. "And if I do?" James stepped closer, his work-roughened hands hanging loose at his sides. "Then I'll build you a life," he murmured. "A quiet one. You don't have to survive anymore. Just live." Her knees nearly buckled. Caught her elbow, his grip warm and sure. "Got daughters who need a man that'll watch over them like sunrise and supper," he continued, eyes on the twins. "And I got hands that ain't done nothing good. Till you put 'em to work." A laugh burst from Nora's lips, wet and unexpected. James smiled, then really smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening like creek beds after rain. He reached into his pocket. Not a ring, but a smooth river stone, worn flat by time. "Don't got much to offer," he said, pressing it into her palm, just a home that knows your name. It's a fire that waits for your hands to stoke it. The stone was warm from his body heat. Nora stared at it, then at her bag, then at the waiting road. The choice stretched before her not between safety and danger, but between the life she'd been handed and the one she could build. Her fingers opened. The bag thumped to the ground, raising a small cloud of dust. "I choose you," she whispered. James exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath for years. When he pulled her close, she went willingly, her face pressed against the steady beat of his heart. The twins giggled at their feet, one grabbing at James' bootlace with sticky fingers. Later, much later, when the preacher asked her to speak her vows louder for his old ears, Nora didn't hesitate. Her I-do rang clear across the small gathering, Mrs. Evelyn watching with pursed lips, the twins fussing in their best dresses, James standing solid as an oak beside her. That night, they sat on the porch beneath a sky thick with stars. James leaned back against the railing, boots off, his bare feet propped on the stump they used as a table. Nora rocked slowly in the chair he'd made her, one baby asleep in her lap, the other curled against James' chest. "You never told me what you wanted," he said suddenly. "Not once." Nora smiled into the dark. "That's because no one ever asked." She shifted the sleeping child in her arms. "Want mornings that don't start with fear. Bread that rises. That's girls who grow up knowing they're enough." Her voice softened. "A man who doesn't make me earn my place at his fire." James nodded, face lit by the glow from the cabin window. "Then that's what we'll build." The wind carried the scent of coming rain. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled and got no answer. Inside, the fire burned low but steady, its light spilling across the floorboards like liquid gold. And in that moment, the road didn't end. It turned. Before you go tell me in the comments, would you have stayed? Drop A for Nora? Or for James? And if this story of second chances hit home, share it with someone who needs a reminder. Even the loneliest roads can lead to love.